Hello, Sales Nation. I'm your host, Will Barron, and welcome to another episode of the Salesman Podcast. On this episode, we have Owen Fitzpatrick, who is an author, psychologist, speaker, and today with Owen, we're talking about charisma. So this is useful both in sales, over at the weekend if you're chatting up women, men, whatever you're into, but also if you're entertaining grandparents, kids. Charisma is a skill that can be learned and applied in many different circumstances and situations, which is why it fascinates me, because when someone walks into the room and they're very charismatic, you're immediately drawn to them, and that phenomenon is really interesting. You can find out more about Owen over at owenfitzpatrick.com, and with that all said, let's jump into today's interview. Hi Owen, and welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Good stuff. You're more than welcome. And so we mentioned this in the pre-recording, our little conversation then, of this idea and concept of charisma absolutely fascinates me. I love it. And something that I've seen, and tell me if you, not sales specifically perhaps, but in business and just the greater world, what I want to start with is there seems to be a link between charisma and success. When I've worked with salespeople in different companies that I've worked in, the top salespeople are always the most charismatic. So what I want to ask to start with is, do you think that the charisma makes them the top salespeople, or do you think that they become charismatic once they've received that success and once they're up there on the sales charts and they're doing well?
Well, I think first of all that charisma definitely massively helps you when you're a salesperson. I mean, your ability to engage people, your ability to be interesting, your ability to fascinate people, your ability to be the kind of person that people want to be around, that's obviously going to make you a more effective salesperson. If you know how to charm people, if you know how to make people smile, make people laugh, if you know how to be able to make it so that people are hanging off your every word, that's going to have huge implications on how charismatic you are. As well as that, though, if you do be successful in terms of at sales, if you start to notice that you're getting higher and the more experience you get, the more confidence you have, and the more confident you are, the more likely you are to be able to be yourself and express yourself, and you feel more comfortable with your own personality, and that enables you to be more charismatic as well. So success can breed confidence, which can then lead in and help you to become more charismatic. But also becoming more charismatic can help you become a more effective salesperson. So either one, but what I largely do is help people to be able to allow themselves to maximize how much of an impact they can make on people when they talk to them either one-to-one or in terms of sales presentations or pitches. Because to me, that's the one thing that you can do, that you can practice it yourself. You can work on your own mind. You can work on your own body language, your own behavior, your own communication. And once you work on that, I mean, to a large extent, you can find a massive amount of information on it. And then it's just a case of repetition, practicing it till you start to really hone your skills. And once you do that, it has a huge impact upon how effectively you sell. And like you said, many of the people that you've seen and that you've studied or interviewed, I'm sure, have a massive amount of charisma. And that is one of the reasons why we want to talk to them, why you want to interview them, you know. So I think charisma itself breeds success, and success can lead to confidence, which can help a person to develop more charisma as well.
Okay, so you mentioned being yourself, which we'd definitely come on to, so I think that's super important. Obviously, that affects your impact and everything else that you mentioned then. But if we know all this, and all this it's pretty obvious, it's something that you're seeing with your eyes. It's not some kind of mathematical formula that you have to work out to suss out if someone's charismatic or not. You see it, and your gut instinct, and you know it. Why is the average person so uncharismatic if they know, and it's so obvious that it's going to be a useful tool for them?
Well, to me, I believe that we're all born charismatic to some degree. So the problem comes about that we develop fears that hold us back. I mean, if you think about babies, and the example I always like to give is that babies and toddlers are naturally charismatic. I mean, you never see a boring baby. You don't go to oh my God, a baby is so boring. They're naturally engaging. They're naturally fascinating. They're naturally able to walk into a room and grab the attention of the whole room. And part of the reason is, well, they're cute. Part of that reason is they're cute. But another part of the reason is that they're fully themselves. They're fully alive, and they're unpredictable, and they're engaging, and you never know what's going to happen with that. And I think a lot of people stay safe. A lot of people play it safe. They tend to do the same kinds of things. And the reason is because of three main fears. They're scared of failing, they're scared of embarrassing themselves, or they're scared of rejection or being rejected. And because of that, they hold themselves back and they don't reveal or let people see the real them. And I think that's the main thing that holds a lot of people back. So in sales, for example, you might think, well, you need to be charismatic to sell, but there's a lot of salespeople that aren't charismatic because, again, they play it safe. So if you have a pitch and you have a certain way of delivering that pitch and a certain tone of voice when you deliver it and a certain facial expression when you deliver it, and it seems to work once or twice, then you'll be able to keep using it over and over again with no care or consideration about the other person, just using the same spiel on everyone as if you were using the same chat-up line on every girl or the same way of doing anything. It might work in one context, but it's not going to work in most contexts. So you have to learn how to be able to overcome those fears. And by doing so, you can avoid making the same mistake that unfortunately so many people do.
So, okay, let me get this straight. You're saying that to become charismatic, it's to become, to be yourself, to get over these fears, to give less of a shit about what people think of you, in such a way that you can throw yourself out there more authentically. Probably authentic is the word I'm looking for there. So you're saying it's that rather than a bunch of body language tricks or walking into a room and looking around and doing these little hacks. Is it more an internal thing?
Well, to me, I see it 50-50, to be honest. Okay. So, but you can't have one without the other. So for example, if you take the external stuff, right, there's a famous self-help book called, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And it's a classic out there. And it's all about, smile, remember a name is the most important word in a person's language, all that sort of stuff. And then a good few years later in the 80s, a book came out called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Mm-hmm. And in that one of the things that Stephen Covey talks about is the difference between the character ethic versus the personality ethic. And he suggests that the personality ethic is all about external tricks and devices and suggestions, and the character ethic is about the deep-seated principles that guide our behavior. So in his ones to do with the external, he talks about think win-win. Think about the other person. He talks about seek first to understand and then to be understood and all that stuff. So he argues that internally it's more important, whereas Dale Carnegie's book was, the vast majority of it at least, was all focused on external. At the same time, I see both of them as being important. So with me, I say that charisma is about learning to be you more and learning to be more you. And the way I differentiate those is to be you more, the way I see it at least, is that you become more authentic. You're being yourself more. You're allowing people to see the real you. If you notice, the people that you're the most charismatic around are likely the people that are closest to you. Mm-hmm. It's like, you can be yourself with your friends, and that's one of the things that makes you engaging or interesting to your friends. Whereas then to be more you, it's your ability to be able to express yourself to other people. So your ability to be able to show that side. So it's one thing being you, but it's another thing being able to make it so that you use your voice more effectively. You're able to use more variety, for example. You're able to make more of an impact with your body language. You're able to grab people's attention with the way you tell stories or the way that you walk into a room, for example. And so to me, it's about learning to be able to get a strong grounding inside of yourself and in terms of the way you feel about you, overcoming the fears that hold you back from being yourself, feeling comfortable in your own skin, and then from there learning to be more expressive, learning to be more animated, learning to be more impactful with the words you choose to use, with your body language, with your tone of voice, with all of the means that you have at your disposal to communicate your message. To me, it's a simple case of working on both areas, and by doing so, I believe you can make a huge difference to how powerful a communicator you really are.
Okay, brilliant. So let's focus on the internal side of things for a split second, then we come on to the external, because the external side of things, I imagine you can probably give us a bunch of tips and tricks and hacks and that kind of thing. So that'll be easy to run through at the end of the show. But internally, I guess it's a harder topic to talk about because you don't know the audience, individually. Everyone has their own fears. Obviously, everyone, as I'm making my notes here, of most people, even though and salespeople are probably the least likely to admit it, but most people are bothered by rejection, embarrassment, these kind of things. Is there any way to get over this other than manning up? And I hate that term, but that's what a sales manager would say to a salesperson. Just get on with it, man up, just keep going, just get rejected 100 times and it becomes less painful. when we're talking about the context of becoming more authentic, the real you, all that you just talked about, are there any ways to go about this? Is there a structured way of going about it is what I'm trying to ask?
Well, yeah, I think first of all, you have to look at what you're scared of and you have to learn to think about it differently. And that means redefining what it means to you. Mm-hmm. See, one of the things isn't the problem isn't that rejection itself is a problem. It's what rejection means to the person. So rejection, they've shown in some research that rejection actually affects the same part of your brain that's responsible for pain. So literally speaking, when a person's rejected, they suggest that painkillers can actually help the rejection. But the problem and the reason why it is painful to be rejected is because, again, from an evolutionary perspective, being socially binding with other people allows us to evolve more effectively. But from our perspective, we think that being rejected by a person makes that, I suppose, from an evolutionary perspective, less likely. Mm-hmm. But really, that's only our interpretation of what rejection means. For example, you take salesperson A and salesperson B. Salesperson A doesn't care about rejection. He'll make 100 phone calls, 1,000 phone calls. He doesn't care because every time he gets rejected, he knows that they're the ones that have made the mistake. They've made a mistake and therefore they've gotten it wrong. Person number two, salesperson number two or salesperson B, he makes a phone call and instantly gets rejected and thinks to himself, they've rejected me, I'm not good enough, and starts to rationalize or interpret it in a negative way. Let me give you another example. Years and years ago, I went out with a few friends when I was in my early 20s. And one of them is just, I mean, I'm okay with rejection, but this guy is like a professional genius when it comes to taking rejection. Like this guy does not, care about rejection. And so we go out on this night and he just will go up to every girl. And there was 3 of us in the group and myself and the other friend started to count how many girls this guy would approach. By the end of the night, from 7 in the evening till about 3:30 in the morning, we counted 82 women that this guy approached, right? Which tells you another story as well about how,
Well, how many numbers did he get out of that 82, though?
Well, you see, he only succeeded on the 82nd, believe it or not. But he would always go for girls that were, way out of his league or whatever. But the key is that every single time he went up, he came back, and it didn't faze him at all. And the next day I asked him, I said, I just want to say, I've never seen anything like it. We counted and we got 82. I said, how do you manage to rationalize that to yourself? Because, I work with people. I don't know if I could deal with 82 rejections in a row. And he goes, for me, the way I look at it is there was a lot of lesbians out last night. And that's how he saw it. He said every time a girl said no, he assumed because she said no, the only possible explanation is that her sexual preference was different to him. Because how could she say no to him? That was the way he filtered it. Now, that's what we call living in delusion land. And I wouldn't recommend it necessarily. But what I would say is that his delusion or his belief enabled him to take the context of a rejection and see it as something that didn't faze him, which in turn made him able to, number one, hold his self-esteem as strong, and number two, allowed him to be able to adjust. Now, at the same time, you have to balance it out, because if you do get rejected, you have to accept that there's information there that you might need to incorporate and then adjust, because he would also use the same pitch all the time. And so, and sometimes in front of the other people that would see him, that, it was like a reality show, right? Before they were big. But the point of it is that he was able to change the definition of what rejection meant to him. So if you're in sales, one of the most important things is ask yourself, if you're rejected, what does it mean? And really start to push that point home. What does it really mean? Does it mean that you're bad? Does it mean you're the worst salesperson? Does it mean you're no good? Or does it simply mean that you've more information about what they want or what they need to hear? You see, I always say to people, if you go into an interview and you're trying to get a job, you need to be able to remember that they're the ones that can make the right decision. And your job is to help them make the right decision and to hire you because you know you do a great job. And the same is true in sales. If someone says no, then you have to realize that that's them making a mistake, and your job is to try to overcome that. Now, when you see rejection like that, it transforms and totally changes your interpretation of it, which in turn changes the meaning that you ascribe, which in turn doesn't make it nearly as scary to most people. Is that making sense?
Makes total sense. The way I look at it is that the person is rejecting the product or the service, likely they're not rejecting you personally, unless you've done something really stupid, you've been an idiot, in which case then it is your own fault. There's nothing you can do about that other than the next time you go around and bat through it. And from that then, is there a step-by-step way from the practical and the physical side of things to put all this and to put it all together? So if people can get over the fear of rejection or reduce it or just put it into context. I think putting it into context is probably the answer here for that. What do they need to do so that when they walk in a room, they're not scared, but they might still be all stiff and a bit weird and,
sure.
They've read in the 90s that you should wave your arms around or you shouldn't cross your arms or you should do. And there's all these weird stereotypes and these weird things that people have suggested in business books throughout the decades. Are there any things that have been scientifically proven to work? And then are there any things that you personally recommend that work from your practice and when you've been working with people?
Well, first of all, I'll say one more internal thing that I would see is almost like a bridge between, working on yourself overall generically about your feelings of rejection and the external stuff, is that whatever questions you ask yourself in your head, whatever attitude you walk into a situation with, whatever mindset will determine largely how you feel and how you come across in that mindset. So, for example, when I work with people about presentations and they're nervous about, embarrassing themselves in public, the first thing I say is, why are you there? And they say, what do you mean? I said, why are you presenting? And they say, well, I'm there to pitch this idea. I said, yeah. Are you there so that they can judge you? Or are you there to convince them of something? And the thing with most people is that most people are so focused on themselves and how everyone thinks of themselves, they think they're going on X Factor, every time that they do it. Whereas in reality, when you're going up on stage, your job is to, maybe you want to teach the audience something. Maybe your job is to influence the audience. But if your focus is on what you're there to do, it means you're not thinking about how you're supposed to be. Because if you do learn these external tricks and you go in and use body language and then you do it, like I've seen politicians do this when they do their stump speeches, and that you can tell they've been to some political consultant who said, use body language and use variety in your tone of voice. So they go, I'm saying to you that I have only learned how to do this way of talking. And they think that that's it. Whereas when your focus is on what it's supposed to be about, which is how can I get this person to make the best decision for them? How can I convince them that whatever product I'm selling, how can I create the right impression in their mind about that product, about that service, about that company? And so when your attention is on what you're there to do, it means you're less self-conscious. And really, once you're comfortable with you, the strategy is to move away from self-consciousness. So if you go in and you go, how do I want them to feel? How do I want them to experience this? And what do I want to get them to do? And also, if you're asking what do they want, all of those questions will in turn guide your natural way of behaving and communicating with them. Then if we move into the actual physicality of it all, Amy Cuddy, I'm sure someone's mentioned her before on your podcast, but Amy Cuddy is a phenomenal Harvard researcher that did a lot of work on what she calls power poses. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that your neurochemistry is affected by your body language. So, for example, if you're in a weak pose, that releases more cortisol and decreases testosterone associated with confidence. If you demonstrate a power pose where you're standing up straight and you look confident and you're taking up lots of space, then your brain tends to release more testosterone and decreases levels of cortisol. So we know that scientifically. Now, we've known that from the NLP, neuro-linguistic programming side of things for years, that your body language. But it's only now that we're getting research to back up what we've been teaching people. And so first, the first things first, to help boost your own confidence state, you alter your physicality so that you're demonstrating the kind of posture that you want. That doesn't mean artificially, trying to make a gesture for a particular point in a sales context. Yeah. It means getting yourself to look the way you would want to feel. And when you do that, your brain will start to help you to feel that way. Now, in turn, there's also research that's been done which shows that when you do demonstrate that confidence, that has an impact upon not just the power structures of a relationship, but it also has an impact upon how the person perceives you and therefore whether or not the person agrees with you or not. A lot of the work that's been done around the power of confidence, for example, shows that the more confident a person is, the more likely other people are to believe them. Even though when you think about it, there's an awful lot of, for example, bullshitters out there that just will be real confident, but they don't actually give much content at all. I mean, all you have to do is, look at, it doesn't really matter what country you're in. Look at a lot of the politicians. I mean, a lot of what they say is empty stuff, but the way they say it is what carries across a lot of the impact. And so...
And with that, Owen, sorry to interrupt you there, but this just came to mind then. Do different people have different ideas of what they see as being charismatic? Could one person see a politician and think, oh, he's full of bullshit, and another person see the same politician looking and not trained and no knowledge of any of this, they're using their gut feeling, and could another person look at them and say, oh, I believe him because of all this? Or are the rules of all this universal?
I think it's more like beauty. And I know the whole saying goes, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but you still see people that the vast majority of everyone would say they're very beautiful. Yeah. Now, by the way, charismatic doesn't necessarily mean likable. So, for example, Hitler was charismatic. On the other side, Gandhi and Martin Luther King were charismatic. Steve Jobs was charismatic.
Well, like every James Bond villain.
Yes, exactly. And they had to be, because, again, they had to engage people. Donald Trump, speaking of James Bond villains, Donald Trump is very charismatic.
For anyone, because quite a lot of our audience, about 50% of our audience in the States, 50% of it is everywhere else. And so for everyone everywhere else, this is the weirdest thing, watching Donald Trump going to become into politics. It's so weird. But I guess that's a story on its own. It's something we can come back to at another time to analyse him in particular. And just before we wrap up, Owen, I've got a couple of questions that I want to run through, and the things that we go through every guest that comes on the show. The first one is there a book or resource other than your own that you could recommend for the Salesman Podcast audience so if they want to dive into this a little bit more?
Sure, I'm very glad that you said other than my own. There's a lot of great books out there. The new one, Presence, by that lady I just mentioned, Amy Cuddy, is a great one. There's also, I mean, it's not necessarily strictly speaking on charisma, although the liking and authority chapters have it. The famous book Influence by Cialdini, which I presume, I mean, if you're a salesperson and you haven't read Influence, what's wrong with you? You know, it's the best influence book out there, in my opinion, along with Persuasion Engineering, which is a really good book to do with applying NLP. But a lot of that is to do with impacting the emotions and the state of the other person and using language powerfully. So I'd highly recommend Persuasion Engineering by Richard Bandler and John Grinder. Persuasion Engineering by Richard Bandler and John Laval. John Laval has done a lot of work in the sales specifically area, so he's a real expert in that area. So again, the aim would be that, you can learn a lot of valuable tools of applying some of the more advanced skills to the sales process, which again, a lot of sales books that I've come across, they talk a lot about motivation and attitude and getting the right attitude. To me, Persuasion Engineering has a lot of practical skills in it that allow you to be able to make a difference, in the moment. So I definitely recommend Persuasion Engineering, Richard Bandler and John Laval.
Fantastic. That's a new one on me, so I'll pick that up myself and potentially review it on the site. Next one, who do you think is the world's greatest salesperson?
Right, well, I think you could look at all the business people. You could look at Richard Branson. You could look at Steve Jobs. You could also look, I think, at screenwriters or directors, because I think a lot of the Hollywood directors create something and sell an idea inside of a story, sell the idea of the story in a really, really powerful way and hold people's attention. So I think that's marvelous. I'm going to go for an Irish person called Conor McGregor. Who
definitely.
For anyone who doesn't know, he's in the UFC. Now, I'm never a huge fan of the UFC, but he is probably one of the most charismatic people I've ever seen at work. The guy has made so much more money because of his personality. Now, he backs it up with being great at what he does, but he knows exactly how to push people's buttons. He knows he's so incredibly confident and exudes that and makes preposterous claims and then fulfills them. I mean, the guy just knows how to grab and keep attention. He knows how to sell himself, and he knows how to make everyone watch him. People like him, people hate him, but everyone, like he says, he goes, if you like me, if you hate me, thank you, because you're still paying for pay-per-view to see me. So, a lot of the people watch him to watch him lose. The others watch him to watch him win, but they're all paying money to him. So in terms of sales, the guy's worth so much more than the vast majority of everyone else in the UFC. So I would have to say at the moment, currently, I would put him as probably the best salesperson out there, you know?
That is the best answer I've had on the show. Definitely 2016, but potentially even ever. I love the UFC, so I'm well into it. But we could probably spend a whole podcast episode just analysing. Because, okay, here's a question for you just on Conor then. Do you think that it all just comes naturally to him, or do you think he's got a team behind him working on all these stories and these angles? And a lot of what he says is quite deep when he's winding up the competition. It seems like it's slightly too deep for one person who's training constantly every day to be coming up with. Do you think he's got a team of people behind him to help him with all this?
I don't think so. I mean, I know some of the circles that he's in Ireland, and I have to say there's definitely a big natural part to it. Like some people, you know, we say, we have the saying in Ireland, the gift of the gab. He definitely has that. There's people that you grow up with here in school, and probably everywhere, but especially in Ireland, that are very smart, thinking off their feet, and they know a certain thing. And I'm sure it's strategic. I mean, he knows exactly what he needs to do is he needs to let himself go down this road of being over the top, saying the most, provocative things. He knows that every time he does that, he gets more eyeballs, and every eyeball he gets is more money. So he's definitely strategic. I think he might check in with people from time to time, but I think a lot of it is, I think the guy in this context is a genius. I genuinely do. I think if you watch the way he does what he does, and put his fighting aside, but the way he winds everyone up, and then afterwards, what's fascinating is, in the fights, he will say the most horrible things to people, like really wind them up, really provoke them, really get them angry. Probably helps from a fighting point of view. But most importantly, after he beats them, if he respects them to start with, a lot of times he'll be actually pretty good. I mean, when he faced the champion that he knocked out in 13 seconds, Aldo, before it, he said the most horrific things over and over again. Afterwards, when he was, talking to Dos Anjos, who he's facing now, he talks about how Aldo is a great fighter and everyone in Brazil. I mean, he will just change it, and he knows how to get under people's skin, and he knows how to do it. And then you see the real Conor McGregor after the fights, where he, thanks his family. He said the only reason he's here is because of his team, and he, and thanks to his country. And that's the real.
The Aldo fight really blew my mind. I've got one final question to ask you after this before we get onto your book and a few other things. But just to wrap this up, that it really blew my mind of the last fight. He was almost like super calm and meditative, whereas before it, and you would think that his natural state from all the hype and all the slagging off that he does of everyone, you'd think that he'd be super hyperactive. But he was just really calm, cool, collected. He knew that he'd broken Aldo with all the banter that he gave him beforehand. He knew it was going to be, and obviously you don't know these kind of things, but he had faith in it. Perhaps faith's a better word. He had faith in his own gift of the gab to wind him up, that he'd broken him. And I just found that fascinating to see the difference, as you described then, of all the mess and the naughtiness of beforehand to he went over and shook his hand and he was genuinely respectful afterwards. And obviously it's just a game to him.
Yeah.
And with that, Owen, because I could talk about Conor McGregor all night, I think he's epic. But I've got one final question. That is, if you go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at sales?
To become better at sales, to my younger self. I would say probably no doesn't matter. That'd be it. Because for me, one of the things that I think got in my way, at least at the start, and got in, a lot of the different circumstances, is that whenever I heard a no, I immediately equated that to rejection, which I equated it to all of this other stuff, and I would think about it and analyze it too much. Mm-hmm. And as you get older and as you experience things, you realize no matter how good your product is, some people are going to say no anyway. If you were selling a time machine, people would say no. If you were selling all the money in the world, people would say no. So just because you have the best product or whatever doesn't mean a person will say yes. So it's not about you if you hear a no. You learn from every no, but no itself doesn't matter. The rejection doesn't matter. So that's probably the main piece of advice that I would give. The other thing would be as well is, can I give myself two?
Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah.
Well, you've gone down that route now. There's no turning back.
Yeah. So the other piece would be, as an Irish people growing up, a lot of times we're not as likely to be positive about ourselves. I mean, it's one thing we were talking about McGregor's. He's like the opposite to the way most of us are brought up in Ireland, which is we're brought up to sort of downplay ourselves and to be more modest and humble, which is a beautiful quality. But in doing so, sometimes it can be restrictive. And I think, what I would also say is never be afraid to show your own greatness. Never be afraid to show how good you are to the world. Now, sometimes you've got to be aware that it might have ramifications or implications from a political point of view. But if you hold yourself back, then what you're doing is you're conforming and you're allowing yourself to restrict yourself so that you're not being all that you can be. And what I'm trying to do with people when I'm working with Olympic athletes or very successful business people is I'm trying to get them to be the best that they can be. And that's not a cliche, be the best you can be and motivate. It's more so helping them not get in their own way, because I know what it's like to get in my own way. As a psychologist, I work with thousands of people, helping them get out of their own way with fears and depression and stuff. And I'm trying, when it comes to confidence and influence, to help people to get out of their own way so they can really make an impact to more people. So they'd be the two main pieces of advice. But I'd probably have a long conversation with my younger self, to be honest.
Tell us a little bit where Sales Nation can find out more about you, your website, your book, and then any other things you want to share as well.
Okay, no problem. My website is owenfitzpatrick.com. It's all the lots of information about me, including a free video. So if you sign up, you'll be able to get a free video and you'll subscribe to my list and stuff and hear more information and stuff. I do blogs on my on the website is my blog, and I do articles every week, and I do videos every couple of weeks as well. And there's, again, my YouTube channel has all the videos there as well. I've got charismatrainingacademy.com, which is my online charisma training with a number of different experts, including myself. About 20 hours or so of online video and audio in that. Also a time mastery course to do with time management. And Facebook, I'm on Facebook. That would be Owen Fitzpatrick International. So if you like the page, then you'll be regularly see lots of different articles I release and all that sort of stuff. And again, there's lots of freebies and all those different things. So there's lots of opportunity for people who want to be able to research more. I've also a book called The Charismatic Edge, which is available on the Amazons and stuff. And again, it's quite a lot of information on how to be more charismatic. A lot of stuff we talked about earlier in the talk.
Awesome stuff. And we'll link to all that in the show notes for anyone who is driving at the moment or on the treadmill trying to scribble all this down as you go through it. And with that, Owen, I just want to thank you again for your time, and thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And there we have it. I just want to thank Owen again for coming on the show. I appreciate it, mate. We're going to have Owen back on to probably talk about Conor McGregor and everything he's doing, because I find that really fascinating, and I love the UFC, and it would just been a really interesting conversation, I think. So Owen will come back on for that. I want to thank you, the audience, as ever, for tuning in. Massively appreciate it, guys. And with that, I'll speak with you again tomorrow.